Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us from wherever you may be located. I'm Luan Ismail, the convener of the Convergence Science Network. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this first International Women in Biomedicine event. This series invites acknowledged women leaders in biomedical research from around the world to share their career journey and lessons learned in becoming a leading scientist, and to acknowledge the many and important contributions and innovation women scientists are making to advance human health and well-being. This series is only made possible by the generous support of Phillips Allman Fitzpatrick, a leading Australian intellectual property firm. It's now my pleasure to introduce Natasha Mitchell, one of Australia's best-known radio science broadcasters. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you so much, Luan. I'm so delighted to be hosting this special Women in Biomedicine conversation with international leading women in this series of talks. And I'm joining you from my dining table, in fact, on the land of the traditional owners of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, scientific leaders with many millennia of knowledge. Our special guest tonight, today, I should say, is Natalia Trayanova. She joins us from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, where she directs the Computational Cardiology Laboratory. Her and her team's work, they program personalised virtual hearts. This is extremely exciting work. So they are designing, in effect, sophisticated, dynamic, detailed digital twins or computer simulations of a person's damaged heart. Help clinicians better understand what treatments they might need, what risks they might face of further cardiovascular events. Natalia is the inaugural Murray B. Sachs Endowed Chair in Biomedical Engineering. She is co-director of the Alliance for Cardiovascular and Treatment Innovation, or ADVANCE. She is professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering and the Institute for Computational Medicine. So many titles. Her CV is a weighty and wonderful tome. Congratulations. Thank you so much for joining me, Natalia.
I am delighted to be here tonight. It's my evening. We have a daylight savings time, but I am extremely excited to be here. And thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Luan, for having me. I love speaking to women, supporting women, and having advancing women's careers is one of the goals of my career as well.
And that is definitely something we're going to chat about today. Let me explain to all of you who are joining us for this Convergent Science event. We're going to talk for about 35 minutes or so. And Natalia is someone who really doesn't hold back. So we might go into interesting and deep terrain from her life because it's quite a story. We could fill 3 hours with passionate stories from your passionate life, I know. Well, where do we start? Shall we start with your early life? Because you grew up in communist Bulgaria under the Iron Curtain.
I did.
You had rare access to a kind of bigger vision of the world, even as a child though, didn't you?
I did. I come from a family of academics. My mother was an economist. She was an economics professor, and my father was a professor of physiology in the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. And he was quite well-known scientist, and it was a rare thing, but he traveled from behind the Iron Curtain to many countries presenting his research. So I had somewhat of more of a pipeline to, international science, if you will. A very tiny straw of a pipeline, of course, but still a vision of what might be going out behind the Iron Curtain.
So what was the environment like under the Iron Curtain, the intellectual environment for scientists?
Well, I mean, in a way, when you grow up somewhere and you don't know anything else, that's your reality, right? So you can't compare with anything else. It was, I worked on my, PhD. I was working on my PhD when I left to come to the US. So you just do your science, you read articles, whatever you have access to, and you do your science. Now, I don't think I had any any even idea of the big picture in terms of what I was doing. But, you try to do your best and publish in local journals because you don't have access to the wider publishing, journals. And, the world is like that, and you live in it.
So let's backtrack a little bit, though, because you leapt straight to a PhD and you didn't start life doing a PhD, although I wouldn't put it past you. If I mention rockets and jet propulsion, what comes to mind? What comes to mind for little girl Natalia?
So Natasha and I had a testing of of the connection, and she asked me what my childhood was, and I said I actually, growing up in parents who were both academics, their friends were academics, everybody was an academic, the kids were kids of academics, so I was put on an elevator towards career in science. And it was not like, it was something I really enjoyed from very young. So my dad had bought me a book when I was 3 years old. I will never forget that. And the book was in Russian, actually. And he would read it to me, and it was all about rockets, really, and how the propulsion and all the physics behind it in a simple way. And from that age, I don't think I ever changed my opinion. I wanted to be a physicist, and I did it. So that was it. I told you, it's an elevator. You put it, that's how it happened.
When you got to America, so you're doing a PhD, you come to America on a fellowship, which is an amazing opportunity to get out of Bulgaria and land in this whole other universe. It wasn't a sort of upward trajectory for you initially, was it? I mean, you were landing in a country that was foreign to you.
It was very foreign, and it's very different from probably nowadays landing in a foreign country, because you can check about the country. There is knowledge. You can inquire. You can Google it. You just land in something, and it's like completely new. Yes, so that was life, but also science was like that. I landed at Duke University working with a professor that I really, really wanted to work with, because that was the book that I have read about how physics can be applied in biomedicine, and that is exactly what I wanted to do. And I ended up there working with him, and even the knowledge that you have is sort of very partial, and then you have to adjust to this new environment, new way of thinking, new way of interacting with graduate students, or the way the American university worked. So it took me a bit of some time to adjust. But it was really a learning period for me. And it was a learning period not only in science, but what it is, how to behave socially, not in terms of the little things, but how to behave in science as somebody conducting research. What does it mean to present to an audience? Really, I never did that before. Here, my undergraduate students are doing it. I had no idea. All these elements that nowadays they come to us as given, or we don't expect to be learning at that age, I had to. So what I'm saying, every aspect of the scientific endeavor for me was a learning experience.
You also became passionate about this intersection between physics and medicine, physics and biology. And
yeah.
So right there, and now you've made the heart your life. And right there, you're landing in this kind of interdisciplinary world where people aren't necessarily used to speaking the same language. They don't even have a sort of common lingo.
Right.
So what was that like? Because that really defines your working life, doesn't it? You're working with doctors, you're working with engineers, you're working with cardiologists, patients, computer engineers, the whole bit.
Yes, so this didn't come at that time. It took a long, long, long time to get to that point. I think it is a very slow realization. So I actually did a lot of research in basic science. I was still using computational models, but I was looking at basic mechanisms by which arrhythmias occur. And normally you look like in a sort of animal models, or, I was looking in the computer models, but I never ever thought that I might have a translational work that relates to the human or will solve patient problems. Never. Something happened in my life in 2013. Basically, I had developed this work to a degree, and then I turned around and proposed to NIH that I do this translation to the clinic, and I received the biggest award that NIH bestows in any field that it supports. NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and it's called the NIH Director's Pioneer Award. And I got that because I suddenly proposed to take all that computational modeling and try to rebuild it for the human, for the patient. And that was the pivoting point when I moved my research in the clinic. But the preparation for that comes, again, it's a mental sort of accommodation, if you will. You have to realize that, coming from physics and engineering, you have to be bilingual. You have to speak clinical language, and you have to speak your engineering or physics language. And you have to train your students to be that way, seamlessly move between the two. If your students cannot speak to a clinician, and clinicians, at least not just in the US, they have a 3-minute attention because they have patients to take care of, right? So if you cannot slot your idea, and if in that time you cannot make it through and explain what you're doing, it's a lost cause. You have to figure out the language. You have to speak to them in such a way that it's related to their patients. That's what they care about. Is this going to solve my patient's problem? So I learned that. And then, so all my students are trained. They take medical classes. Everybody can speak. We intermingle with the clinicians at clinical meetings. So everybody, and if you think engineering is here and the clinical practice is here, people think, oh, you are collaborating, you have to meet in the middle. That's not the case. You have to meet them over here. You got to meet the clinicians over there. They take care of patients. And after, some time of interaction and you develop trust, maybe they'll move a little bit, but it's never 50.
Fascinating. What a fascinating dynamic. I do wonder, did you encounter, because, they're dealing with life and death every day.
Yeah.
They're dealing with incredibly emotional conversations with living humans.
Yeah, exactly.
You're dealing with, artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer programming,
right.
And it's a whole other world. And have you encountered deep skeptics from the clinical environment? Well, hang on, we're dealing with a beating heart here. You can't just bring a computer model in of someone's heart and make life and death decisions. That's what I do as the cardiologist.
Right. Yes, I mean, skepticism has been like a major part of my life all the time, because what I was doing was was falling, it was always in the cracks. It was not just physics or just engineering, but it was this in between, interdisciplinary. And to have a buy-in, I needed the clinicians. But that, again, they're also skeptics. They're very skeptical. They can be extremely skeptical. So what happens is the acceptance that you receive as it grows. So you have to start bringing to your side some of these people by whatever means, by being able to speak their language, as I said, by being able to show them, like, well, I got this award. Look at me. And they think, oh my God, the NIH gave her the biggest thing. Maybe I should listen a little bit. So you use every way that you can to pull people to your ideas and try to don't give up. Don't give up on the idea. That was my thing. Slowly you bring sort of a acceptance around it, and it takes root at some point.
Before we come to the specifics of the work that you are actually doing with doctors and their patients and your technology, I was reminded of your wall of shame. Which is just fabulous. You have a really fabulous philosophy about rejection. Tell us what that is.
Well, people have mentors in their lives. My students have me, and I have a lot of experience. And the experience is not just doing the research, it's also political savviness, right? Or grantsmanship. How do I write a grant that is going to be successful? So all these things come from the mentors. The mentors in life are very, very important. And here is me. I come from Bulgaria. I don't have a mentor. I don't have a pedigree. I don't know anybody. I'm trying to learn how to move in this world. So everything is an obstacle. I have absolutely no idea how to become visible. This is what it is. You need to become visible. And I have no idea. So I write the grant, it gets rejected. There is a scientific meeting, you submit an abstract, gets rejected. So I had so many rejections. Everything was a rejection. So in my lab, we created the wall of shame, and we would put every rejection on it. And there is something, I don't know, you face up to it. You face up to it and say, okay, well, it's part of my life. So what do? I'm not going to give up. It's already part of my life. Might as well carry on, right? So to me, it's like, it's also a mentorship of a different type. A mentorship, how to take a gut punch and not fall down, right? So I'm going to carry on and believe in yourself. And, okay, in the face of all that, it's even ultimately happier when you get there. You don't feel, it was given to me by somebody. I feel I earned it by fighting it.
Huge. It's huge I'm thinking of the big community of early career researchers in Australia, some of whom will be dialing in today. And hello, if you are. This relationship to rejection has become very intimate in the sciences because they spend a big chunk of their time trying to chase grants to establish their careers. Yeah, it's crazy in a resource-constrained environment.
It never stops. It continues. It's just that some are successful. But I think it continues to be always like that. But it's particularly hurtful to the young researchers. It's true.
Yes, who face kind of having to walk away from science, even though they've got all the passion and all the ideas and they've built the relationships and they're often racing, but somehow thing is not there to enable that to continue. So what is this work that you're doing enabling to happen that cardiologists didn't have access to previously? What is the power of creating a digital twin of someone's heart? And perhaps give us a sense of what that digital twin looks and feels like. Like, how many levels of function are you able to model? Are you going from the macro right down to the cellular, right down to the genetic?
It's an idea of, so I'm going to take a step back and say, if you think about industry, building digital twins is actually a common industrial practice. Let's say you don't want a machine to fail, so you create a model of the machine and have all the tensions and what is being worn out. So if you have to buy a new part, you don't buy the new part when the machine has to stop. You know in advance what's happening, so you can order the part and change it. That's a very basic sort of a concept. So industry uses that a lot. It's a known concept. And so what we are trying to do is to bring this to the clinic in the same way. So you have the patient, and you monitor parts, let's say an organ, or ultimately we want to have a virtual patient. I probably would not be that person, but let's say that's the vision. And you monitor what is happening. And you create this digital twin, and hopefully as machine learning and data science advances, you will be able to have a continuously updating virtual twin of the organ. So whenever the patient comes to the clinic, whatever data there is, it goes into that, and whatever prediction this digital twin is making for the future gets updated and so forth. So we started working in that space. So what we are doing is we are taking whatever is available for the patient. Very often they will have a scan of their heart, whether it's MRI or CT, and some other knowledge about what's happening. Some of the stuff that we don't know, we supplement from the literature. And so we want to have like relationships that go down, drill down to the cellular, and you see when you have connections between cells and you have phenomena, they are very nonlinear. So what happens at the whole heart can be very different from what a single cell is doing, because when they're many, it's a completely different phenomenon, highly nonlinear. So this allows us, and I think we will substitute more of this information that comes from the literature with personalized data, as now we have digital update of a lot of the patient information and diagnostic. So that's
so then the idea. And you can also update it with medication regimes as well.
Oh, of course, yes, of course.
That's key.
You can recalculate that, and so we do that for two purposes: to have a better prognostication. What is the trajectory of the patient? So they have heart disease. What is going to happen? Who is at risk for sudden cardiac death? Because many people just are going to die suddenly. But they don't have the symptoms, but the heart has it, but we just don't know about it. So what you're trying to do is to get this information and be able to predict, so appropriate action can be taken, targeted therapy before and so forth. And the other so this is the prognostics. And the other big research avenue is the treatment, where we do we predict what is the best treatment. We can play out scenarios with this digital twin, with this virtual heart, and say, okay, this patient, and this is very personalized. Like, this patient has such a damage to the heart, that much scar, it's right here, that's how you need to treat it. And we are talking here interventional cardiology, when they go with a catheter inside and burn pieces of the heart that are the perpetrators and so forth. We are able to predict that, where to execute that.
How do you measure accuracy of a model? I mean, given that the heart is a dynamic organ, I'm interested in how you measure accuracy, and also then how do you measure success? How do you measure success? Because ultimately you want to prevent an event happening, don't you?
It's an excellent question, and it is one that it is part of the transition from engineering or physics towards clinical medicine. I was used to having error accuracy in a computational model in some sort of a mathematical expression. That's my accuracy because I have that kind of method, and that's my discretization, and that's what I have. And then you go to the clinic and they do it in the patient. Now, how my model can be excellent, but the clinician navigated the catheter to it. It's not a robot. It's a guy who does it. Yeah. Where they do it, what is the registration error between what they see on the screen and my model? There are so many aspects. So it took me a while to realize that accuracy is not what you're used to. Accuracy is something completely different. All what it boils down to, can you predict an adverse event, number one? And number two, when you're doing prediction of treatment, what is the clinical outcome? For instance, we are working on arrhythmias. Does the patient have an arrhythmia after a while? You can't do it right away because I might have all kinds of disturbances when the heart settles down, let's say in 3 months or in a year. So typically when we do treatment, we measure clinical outcome in, does the arrhythmia reoccur in a year? That's a failure. If it doesn't reoccur, that's a success. You treated the patient successfully. That's it. That's the difference in accuracy from a mathematical expression to I wait a year and I see.
And you're dealing with real flesh and bones. It's quite a different world, isn't it? You got a big or a substantial clinical trial approved by the FDA, Food and Drug Administration in the USA. So is that a first? So this is to That's a first. So this is to actually demonstrate the utility of these computer simulations in particular subset of patients, yeah?
Yes, in driving interventional treatment in the heart.
Brilliant. And where's that at?
At Hopkins. At Hopkins.
And it's happening? It's happening, it's underway?
Yeah, it was really difficult during COVID to recruit patients because we stopped clinical research for quite a while. Now it's restarted. So it's just beginning again. We're starting it again. So we'll see how it goes. These things are, you can have high hopes for, what the way I view it is we're going to learn a lot.
Yeah, that's the ultimate philosophy to have right now on every front, I think, as well, having spoken to a lot of scientists who have had clinical trials interrupted at this time. So at this stage, now that you have a sort of, 80-page CV and all the accolades and all the recognition and lots of funding, good funding, and you're right there, you now are speaking out and advocating very strongly on the issue of women in science. And I wonder whether you see this Metoo moment, which is much more than a moment. It's a millennia of moments, multi-millennia of moments. How you see that playing out in science?
So it is definitely having an effect. And I think, in the US during the Metoo movement, now it's 2 years already, the initial focus was less on gender equity as it was more on sexual harassment. I think we have sort of passed that. That remains, but we've dug deeper. It is more equity and where the climate is hostile. Small things, daily small things make a hostile climate. So recognizing that and enabling, women to stand up for that and, fight against.
Let's talk about what constitutes a hostile environment, because, often in scientific workplaces, people will go, oh, we're all friends, we get together for lunch around the table, and people don't understand the many faceted ways that an environment can be hostile. It works at every level, doesn't it? It works at, well, can I have a career break to have a child? Can I, all sorts of ways. It's from the big to the small.
Right, exactly. You're absolutely right. They are, yes, exactly, from having tenure, being promoted, or having a balance between career and family. Those are the big things. But then there are the smaller things, like in science, very often I see, particularly in male-dominated fields, which mine is, you can see a lot of women have much harder time being invited to be, what we call faculty, because those are medical meetings. They have a CME credits for the clinical fellows and so forth. So who gives the talks? It's the faculty, and the faculty have been predominantly men and remain that. There were years in which I would say, well, my only benefit of going to this meeting is there was never a line in the bathroom. I can go to the bathroom without waiting in line because there were no women, right? So there are more women now, and there is a recognition that more women are invited to faculty, but it's a slow change. A lot of, review panels, and particularly when you have a big meeting and all the big bosses sit there opening at the meeting, you look at them and it's only men. And I told you that we call them the manels. They are not panels.
The manels.
Because they're only men. All that, like who gets invited to write a review paper on a subject that is fashionable or sexy? Well, it's unlikely it's going to be a woman. That's what statistics says. So that's in the science. Also in the workplace, even in academia, in a department, in whatever it is, there is always the little things, that the meeting, who talks and who's, do people talk over me? Do people, I suggest an idea, somebody says that idea again, and everybody turns towards him and says, oh, yeah, this is a great idea, and what I said is being ignored. These things are daily, and I have been noticing these for a while, and then so the best way to do that is to sort of cope with that is we have a little group of senior female faculty, women who have their own institutes like me, they're leaders. So also I found, this is very interesting, I think that the gender problems are different depending in academia, depending whether you're junior or senior female faculty. I think nowadays, at least in the US, there is more of an understanding that we need female faculty. We need to hire young female researchers. So this has been going on. I think that there is now a pipeline. And in the beginning, when you join a faculty, actually there are now, male mentors that will help you, or female mentors. But as you go the ladder and get to the top level, okay, I feel it gets uncomfortable when you're there, right?
In what way? In what way?
Not to me. I think it's like new thing, right? Women are now also leaders, and somehow I feel like this is different from being a junior faculty that you can mentor, give advice, and lead. Now you don't lead. You don't tell this person what to do. They are leader equal with you. So I think there are specific different problems for the women in leadership in academia. From junior faculty, female faculty members, but the different levels of potential hostility they are not very often. They would not be. They're just bias, and people don't even know this is happening. It's just bias, and the bias is not just in men; it is also in women, and we recognize that. It's just we need to work through it. We have to really help people understand. I would do exercise in my own lab, I have 30 people, and we did, there is a website, I think it's created by Harvard. Now I'm talking from the top of my head, I don't quite recollect. But you can go and figure out your biases, and we would sit around on Zoom and tell each other, what did the questionnaire end up? What is the conclusion? What are your biases? Racial, other, there are all kinds of things that you can play. For instance, you say a word, and whether you associate with female or male profession and so forth, so we tried. We actually this fall I spent a lot of time.
Which is absolutely well. It's vital in your field because, of course, now we're starting to understand in machine learning that the data sets that we're feeding these algorithms are kind of produce shocking results because, of course, they're biased. So, if you ask an algorithm, traditional male or female jobs, then you won't get an engineer coming up, I can tell you,
Exactly. I mean, when we get to artificial intelligence, machine learning, this is very important. Diversity and equity is extremely important there because it's not just the participation of women and minorities, it's also what comes out of these algorithms, I mean, a simplest thing, let's say you go to a bathroom and you want to have the soap to work. If I put a white hand, it works. Maybe if it's not a white hand, it will not work as well. Simple thing. The light diffracts differently. All these are simple things that need to be taken into account. And when we look at where we stand now, a lot of the clinical trials have been done on men, white men, for drugs, for procedures, for crash test dummies. I read an article a couple days ago how it's all the size of a man, of average man.
I was just going to say, yes, that issue is vital in cardiology as well because, of course, the way in which women present with heart attacks is quite different often. Different.
Many women have been sent home thinking, they're hysterical. These symptoms, they are not symptoms of heart attacks. They're not. And they're not. They're different in men. So,
yeah. So, I mean, on that, I'd love your thoughts about what we need to change, because given that it does filter into the very questions we ask as scientists, into how we see our data, interestingly, I think there's a lot of fascinating research about that, about the way in which biases can affect how we interpret our results, questions we ask, but also what culture of practice we cultivate in science. What needs to change? I love this exercise of getting your team members to do these bias activities. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's very, very important to recognize that. I think it's very important. So the literature shows that papers, for instance, scientific papers that have female authors in them, consider gender as variable in their research. Okay, so the answer to that is get more women to do the science. It's not, we always say, let's have more women because it makes a diverse team. Diverse team is typically more productive. That's known. There is team science that demonstrates that that's the case. But there are so many other things in research. It is how clinical trials that have more women on, as part of the team have considered also gender as a very important. I mean, that was in the past. Now everybody considers gender in the clinical trials, but specifically in papers, in scientific papers, more female authors, gender is definitely a variable. So it is a matter of policy, right? So we want more women in science, because we want to have a better teams. We want to have science that addresses equally men and women, also minorities, and we want policy made that addresses that.
It's interesting, isn't it? When I did engineering, I was quite vocal on these issues, but a lot of my colleagues just wanted to sort of, put their head down and work hard and not be othered as a woman, and wouldn't necessarily want to kind of bring up an issue of gender in the design of a trial, for example. Like, why should the women have to do that? But I guess the point is that if you have a diverse team, people start to see each other. You can't kind of be what you can't see, in a way. So men might start bringing it up because they're surrounded by women. Oh, hang on, this could be a variable,
Right.
Right. Yeah.
But it's also, we have the advantage of being also in a cultural moment. We cannot ignore that, right? I mean, 20 years ago, no matter what I'm saying right now, I doubt I would have been that vocal. I would have been I would have had a broader interest in that, because now I'm interested in that. I read about that. And I don't think it was that way. It wasn't. It is really a difficult path to walk. You don't want to be the person who complains. You don't want to be the person who raises that. Nowadays, I'm not the only one. There is also, people are more open. This is a different moment. It's a cultural moment. And I think indeed we have to take advantage as much as we can of that to enact equity and diversity and success in these things that we couldn't achieve like 20 years ago.
That's such a great point you make about taking advantage of the wave of change. Yeah, exactly. It's there. It's in some way, it's, if people are feeling a little uncomfortable or threatened about it, in fact, if you can embrace it, it is there to support you in advocating for cultural change in science, isn't it? It's good. It's a great point you make. So we had a question. What was the highlight of your time at Tulane?
Music. It's in New Orleans. Yeah, so I love the city of New Orleans. I liked, of course, being faculty at Tulane, but I liked the city of New Orleans so much. My daughter never left. She lives in New Orleans, and she's a musician, a professional musician. So at that time she was very small, but she was playing drums since age of 9. And I remember, I would drive her at night. She couldn't drive. I would drive her to bars and she played in bars. And so to me, the music and the city of New Orleans was the biggest asset. I had wonderful colleagues too, friends that remain to this day. one of my best friends, because New Orleans is not a place, it's a state of mind. It's like, it's crazy, free, amazing place that never leaves you. Once it's in you forever. So
I was just listening to a phenomenal podcast about the aftermath of the hurricane, the cyclone, Hurricane Katrina, and
we went through it. We were in it.
You were in it.
That was probably the most tragic event in my life. We were there. My daughter lost it, flooded. This is a whole story, another whole story. And I wasn't in the city, but I was in China to give a talk. And for whatever reason, I got very sick and I had appendectomy in China on the day when the levees bursted in New Orleans and we flooded. And my husband met me. He was in Sydney. He flew to China. It was the craziest story of my life.
Crazy time. Oh my God, that's a whole story. I landed to live in Boston that week for a year, and it just blew my mind the way in which it was covered. It was tragic.
It was horrible. It was horrible.
Horrible. And these things do define us, and I think sometimes make us rethink what we do in terms of our science as well. Irene asks, you talk about simulation experiments in humans. However, has this sort of clinical trial been done in animals?
So if it's in animals, it wouldn't be called a clinical trial. It's just experimental work. And so what we are focusing a lot is on human disease. So if you do in animals, you are not going to have the same. I mean, some of the basic mechanisms are the same. Of course, a lot of work has been done in animals, but not everything is translatable directly to humans. And think about it. I don't know whether you've seen a human heart. They're covered in fat on the outside.
I have.
And animals don't have that. Animals don't have that. And there are so many diseases that are diseases of lifestyle that you cannot replicate directly in animals. So while we understand the basic way an arrhythmia will occur, some sort of electrical disturbance will occur, the specifics of human disease are very different. So all my work was in simulating animal models when I was doing basic research. But when I moved to the clinic, there are many new things that had to be figured out or incorporated because they don't exist in animals.
Absolutely. And we have a question from I'm a young clinician, they write, who is very interested in the direction medicine is heading, particularly with the integration of technology and individualised treatments. What would your suggestion be to become more involved in this area, especially when medicine can sometimes be so set in its ways? That's such a vital question. A lot of young medical scholars, there's a lot of frustration. They kind of enter a tradition. Same with genetics, a lot of frustration there too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. It's you have to try to reach out. I mean, I get all the time people reaching out from residents that even in other fields, what do I do? Learn something about more than just statistics, a little bit more of machine learning or something. Or people now do some of the clinical fellows that I have talked to, some of them take even an online course. They want to have something in mind when they treat patients or see patients. What are the other approaches than the traditional medicine? They are there. Just self-broadening the horizon is something that I have seen people do here. And that makes also reaching out to people in other disciplines easier because you have also the set of tools, or at least a notion of the tools. So there is a sort of a level of crossover that can occur.
It strikes me that people who do build those collaborations early, they're curious, they read widely, they read outside of their discipline, they walk the corridors, they actually have to put some effort into building relationships and wandering into labs that they would never have wandered into and literally just starting a conversation. It's those kind of informal connections that inspire collaboration.
Right, exactly. everything is happening on the personal level, and reaching out is very important. And, also accepting reach outs, right? Somebody wants to talk about something that they have in mind, an engineer or something, might sound like a ridiculous idea, but you connect and see maybe there is something there, or maybe we'll just generate another link because you kind of cross over a little bit. So I think openness to me is the key to everything.
And the other thing that occurs to me too, we often think of work experience as something we do in our early careers, but in fact, there's nothing to stop someone other than time and logistics and the crazy schedule that we all live from actually creating work experience placements for yourself all your life. Can I come and shadow you in your lab for a week? I'm a clinician. I need to come and see, that kind of thing.
Yes. Yes. My students shadow a lot of the doctors, particularly in the early career, like undergraduates that also work in the lab. A lot of that, yes, it's the reaching out, the openness, and it takes some effort. There is no way around it.
We've only got a few more minutes left, and I'd just love to talk to you all afternoon. Katrina has written a great one. It's fantastic, she says, to hear from such an incredible, honest person. Natalia, you spoke about dealing with rejection. How do you deal with conflict and barriers? Well, that's a big question.
I'll start with the barriers, because barriers is simpler to me. Barriers is something you look at it and say, I just have to find a way to overcome it, right? I mean, barriers are to be overcome. So I got to find a way. So with conflict, one needs to be politically savvy. We cannot avoid that. So we don't want to create conflict, but we also don't want to be sort of run over. We want to be heard. So it's a delicate balance. And again, as everything in life, you pick your battles. Those are the conflicts you have to resolve, and you have to find a way. Sometimes you might be forceful, but you need to resolve them. And there are other battles in which, you can win there. Just they're not the important battles to you. So pick your battles again. Conflicts, I try not to get to a headbutting, I try to anticipate. It's important to anticipate. It's important to also find a way to show people that you respect their opinion, even if they are adversaries. That is really important. And I think respect and also ability to listen and be open, whatever you would be thinking after that, but it is important to demonstrate that. I think it's actually honest to be open. You have to. I mean, maybe they, avoiding this as much as you can, the preconceived notion what it has to be.
Yes.
Is a good way if it is achievable, So all these things play a role. You succeed in some, you fail in others, but you try your best.
Beautifully diplomatic answer. What are you excited about right now? What's really exciting you?
Oh, I'm so excited I got the vaccine.
Oh, congratulations. Wow.
Yes, I've had it since February because we are, anybody at Hopkins who is the School of Medicine and has access to patients is vaccinated. But, I really want to I went to one scientific conference, and just the energy you can get from your colleagues being there, talking to you about, being interested in your work in person. And that is it's amazing to be able to do that. And I've forgotten what it was. So I'm very excited to sort of re-enter my previous life in which, you want to talk to people who are interested, explain, give them an ideas how this can be achieved and what a difference approaches like this can make. And so this is to me exciting again to be back. I typically these days attend predominantly clinical conferences. I'm very often the only presenter who's an engineer. It's not an MD. But I love that. I love that. I like that they have embraced me, and I'm one of them. I love that, and I want to constantly be there, so they don't think and being an engineer is a temporary presence. No, I want to be there. So
I love that. I love that you're a professor of medicine and you're a professor of engineering, biomedical engineering, and you have neither a qualification in biomedical engineering or in medicine. It's just a brilliant thing. I mean, it sounds like this engagement with the clinic has been utterly transformative to you and your sense of self as a scientist, yeah?
Yeah, it's much more gratifying to be. I found it more gratifying, and also I found it enables faster adaptation to new stuff, because you see that the potential to make a difference is so exciting. Then I'm like, oh yeah, this is new. Oh, maybe I'll take that and figure out how I can incorporate it. So this is like a huge driver for me. Huge.
Yeah. A final thought then for those who are tuning in at the beginning of their career. This is the Women in Biomedicine Speaker Series. What advice would you love early career women scientists and their male allies to hear?
Don't you ever give up. Stick with your guns. Don't ever give up. You have a good idea. Maybe everybody is thinking this is not going to work. Show them it's going to work. Perseverance to me is incredibly important. Perseverance, motivation. Just stick with your guns.
Stick with your guts. And I want to acknowledge too that when I said male and female, I also mean non-binary, because science is a diverse community.
Oh, of course, yes. And I have LGBTQ in my lab too. I have all kinds of, diversity, Black, Latin, I like a diverse group. It's interesting. It was particularly interesting when we discussed biases, to hear what people, it is, oh my God, you learn.
Yes, and taking the responsibility of having to raise those issues away from the people with the direct lived experience is when you're really actually becoming a proper ally in a team. So not just making them be the one that has to go, well, hang on a tick, what about Black Lives Matter?
Right.
That's leadership. Look, it's been an absolute delight to speak to you, and what a treat.
Fun. Yeah,
it is fun. Thanks for making time this evening. I know you couldn't be with us in Australia for the Graham Clark oration, but I know that the Convergence Science Network are trying to make that happen. And the vaccine is one good step to getting there, so that's fantastic news. I'm going to hand over now to the Executive Director of the Convergence Science Network, Luan. Natalia, thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Great pleasure to chat with you, Natasha. It's great fun. I like honest conversations and conversations that span everything, and that's what we did.
We sure did, and I want to thank you all for posting your questions too and for dialing on today. Over to you, Luan.
Thank you, Natasha, and a special thank you to Dr. Natalia Trayanova. It's now a delight to invite Alyssa Telfer, a partner at Phillips Orban Fitzpatrick, the event sponsor, to say a few words. Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you, Luan. And on behalf of the Convergence Science Network and Phillips Orban Fitzpatrick, I would like to thank you, Professor Trayanova, for sharing your story today, or this evening, I should say, for you, where it's well past 10 p.m. Thanks so much for being so flexible. At Phillips Orban Fitzpatrick, we specialise in advising innovators on strategies for protecting their intellectual property. We prepare and file patent applications for a range of technologies, including biotechnology and biomedical engineering. But as patent attorneys, we see our role not only to protect frontiers in science, but also to promote them and to promote excellence in research and foster communications between scientists and engineers, but also between those innovators and the community more broadly. Hence our involvement as sponsors in this series of events. In sharing Professor Trayanova's story today, we hope to demonstrate to the wider community, young and old, men and women, that pushing the frontiers of science and technology is exciting. It's immensely rewarding, and it's equally the domain of women and men. Professor Trayanova, your story really resonated with me. I found myself nodding in furious agreement on more than one occasion, and I've made a few notes from your wisdom. One is that progress requires persistence, passion, openness, and awareness of one's own biases. And it also requires a skill in communicating important concepts in a way that is concise, but also relatable to the audience, whether that's a clinician, an engineer, a data scientist, or an online audience. And I guess for me also, it's never too soon to start reading to your children about science. And that's something that I think my children would also agree with. The work that you're doing and that your team is doing is precisely the type of innovation that inspired me to study biomedical engineering as a young woman in the early 1990s. And it's a decision that's led me to a very rewarding and most interesting career. I'm grateful to you and to other women like you for inspiring women like me to pursue a career in science and engineering. And I hope that new generations of young women and young men will also see fit to study these particular areas. In addition, we hope that this series of events, which promotes the work of internationally recognised women in biomedicine, will inspire confidence in research in biomedical science and engineering and the downstream benefit that this can have in human health. And importantly, I hope that these events are effective in highlighting the often unrecognised contribution that women make to advances in science, medicine, and engineering. Professor Trayanova, again, on behalf of the Convergence Science Network and Phillips Orman Fitzpatrick, I thank you for a very entertaining and very interesting conversation today.
Thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak to you. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, we've come to the end of our first International Women in Biomedicine event. Thank you, Natasha, for your, as usual, wonderful emceeing and great probing questions. Natalia, a very special thank you to you for your commitment and enthusiasm to be involved in this event. When I approached you a while ago, you jumped at it immediately. So I'm very grateful for the commitment you've made to join us, particularly given the time difference. I'm sure sharing your personal story and remarkable journey will inspire and motivate many women scientists who are forging their own research career. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone who's been part of the event in wishing you continued success in your research. It's very important. And I do hope that we can welcome you to Melbourne in 2022. And finally, thank you to you, the audience, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at a future Convergence Science Network event. This series is only made possible by the generous support of Phillips Orman Fitzpatrick, a leading Australian intellectual property firm. And again, to our special guest, Dr. Natalia Trayanova, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.